The following video depicts and describes historically accurate facts regarding crucifixion. Parents are advised it may not be suitable for children.
The crucifixion of Jesus Christ is one of the most well-known historical events acknowledged by modern man. Finding verification in various ancient resources, such as the patristic fathers, early Gnostic texts, the historian Josephus and Tacitus, the crucifixion itself has tremendous historical support, but nowhere gives more in-depth details of the incident itself than the New Testament. And according to the Gospel of Matthew, the historical events unfolded like this. After the release of the revolutionary outlaw Barabbas and symbolically washing his hands with a trumped-up verdict, the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate officially convicts Jesus of the crime of high treason and sentences him to death, handing him over to his soldiers to prepare for the act of crucifixion. Like most who had to endure this kind of gruesome death sentence, Jesus' road to the cross began with the traditional flogging, the horrible, flesh-ripping, torturous act that was meant to hasten the death of those about to be crucified. As a condemned criminal, Jesus would have been stripped naked with his bare skin exposed, tied to a post with his hands above his head, and beaten by a group of drunken Roman soldiers between 4 to 8 men who would have used a whip of leather cords with pieces of bone, lead, glass, and other sharp objects embedded in the leather. And while the Jews limited this to 40 lashes, 39 minus 1, the Romans had no such limitations, which often led to massive blood loss, severe lacerations, and damage to the skin, muscle tissue, and internal organs, with historical reports of victims being filleted and opened up to the point that their inner bowels and bones were exposed. After enduring this barbaric beating, the Gospel of Matthew informs us that Jesus was then taken away by as many as 100 Roman soldiers back into their military headquarters, where they continued to torture and abuse him with a mock royal coronation known as the King's Game, a historically cruel game played by the Romans to psychologically torment those condemned of political crimes against the state. Taken as a whole, this game was carried out by dressing the prisoner, in this case Jesus, like a pretend first century king, and mocking his revolutionary ambitions by moving him around a makeshift game board with insults and abuses being hurled at him. In this instant, they made Jesus look like their needed game piece by dressing him in a scarlet robe, probably a faded scarlet military cloak that looked purple enough to mimic royal dress, and by twisting together a crown of thorns or a mimic emperor's wreath made from regional thorny plants that when put on him would have pierced his forehead and caused him to bleed profusely. Next they put a reed in his hand, or a fake royal scepter, which was likely a bamboo cane that was used to inflict military beatings. Finally they knelt before him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," which was meant to mimic paying homage to a wannabe king while being a wordplay on Hail Caesar. After finishing the cruel game, they then turned to more direct insults and overt physical abuse by continually spitting on Jesus as an act of humiliation and derision, and repeatedly beating him in the head with a durable military cane that was once used as his mock royal scepter. After they had their fill of using Jesus for their sadistic entertainment, they prepared him for the crucifixion itself, stripping him of his mock military cloak and redressing him in a loincloth, preparing him to make the long trek to his own execution site by strapping a 30 to 40 pound horizontal crossbeam to his beaten back. After forcing him to walk several miles through the streets of Jerusalem and being jeered and mocked by hundreds of onlookers, somewhere along the way Jesus collapsed from physical fatigue, and the soldiers had to temporarily enlist a man named Simon the Cyrene to carry Jesus' crossbeam the rest of the way. Inevitably, the Roman soldiers, Simon and an utterly bloodied and exhausted Jesus, make it to the execution site, the infamous Golgotha, a place notorious for capital punishment and death. It is here where the actual act of crucifixion is carried out, an act that was known to be one of the most gruesome forms of capital punishment ever invented, being used by such world empires as the Assyrians, Persians, and the Greeks, but perfected by the Romans, who used it as the ultimate deterrent against anyone who dared challenge Roman rule. By New Testament times, the agonizing slow death of crucifixion was synonymous with horror and public shame, while being reserved for the most heinous of first-century criminals. Carried out in the most public place possible, usually outside the city of the most well-traveled roads, the condemned would hang for several hours, if not days in the hot sun, dehydrated, stripped naked, swarmed with gnawing insects, and often unable to control their own bodily functions as they struggled to lift themselves in order to breathe. As Andreas Karlstedt explains, In order to avoid asphyxiation, the condemned had to push themselves up with their legs and pull with their arms, triggering muscle spasms that caused almost unimaginable pain. Although various sadistic methods were used to affix the condemned to the cross, the Romans preferred tying and nailing. As John informs us, it was the latter that was used on Jesus, meaning that they hammered into him 5 to 7 inch thick nails that would have been equivalent to modern day railroad spikes, with his feet being nailed together at his ankles, and his hands being nailed at the wrists to both ends of the crossbeam. Atrocious physical agony, length of torment, and public shame combined to make crucifixion the most horrible form of death known to the first century world, and one that would be inevitably labeled not fit for any form of civilized humanity. After finishing this horrendous act, a sign with authorized written notice identifying the official legal charge that led to his crucifixion was attached to the cross, acting as a public reminder to anyone who read it that the same fate would happen to them if they tried anything similar. In addition to this, 2 other criminals were crucified with Jesus, one to his right and one to his left. 2 men who were in the Greek called listii, meaning their crimes would have likely involved terrorism and assassination rather than cat burglary and petty theft, in turn emphasizing the political revolutionary charges that Jesus was falsely accused of. The Gospel of Matthew then goes on to emphasize the public ridicule Jesus endures as he hung on the cross waiting to die. As the text reads in Matthew 27:39-44, "And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, 'You who destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross.' So also the chief priests with the scribes and the elders mocked him, saying, 'He saved others, but he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusted God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him, for he said, I am the Son of God.' And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way." Taken as a whole, Matthew wants everyone to remember how the common folks who once endeared him now rejected him and turned on him. How the religious leaders who once debated him now did everything they could to emotionally torture and break him. And even how the 2 revolutionary outlaws who were crucified with him initially had nothing but derision and contempt for him, completing the scene and showing how everyone at the cross at this point had officially turned against Jesus, leaving him totally alone and forsaken, setting the stage for the most difficult aspect of the entire crucifixion event for Jesus himself, the outpouring of the wrath of the Father, and all the implications for him personally that came with being the atoning sacrifice who would die for the sins of the world. As Matthew tells us, 27:45-46, "Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land until the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, 'Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?' That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Although Matthew is retelling a real historical event, when from noon to 3 p.m. on Good Friday, the immediate area where Jesus was crucified became totally blacked out, behind this historical event is cosmic and theological significance that is playing off the biblical symbolism of darkness being equivalent to God's judgment. Thus what we have here is a supernatural act that is meant to symbolize what is actually taking place on the cross itself, when the full fury of God the Father's wrath is being poured out in judgment on God the Son, Romans 3:25 and Romans 5:9-10, when Jesus himself literally becomes cursed, Galatians 3:13, and the Son is treated as if he is the one who has committed the billions of sins of those who would inevitably be forgiven when they put their faith in him, 2 Corinthians 5:21. Then, as the supernatural darkness is about to end, at the onset of Jesus' physical death, he cries out an emotional, heart-wrenching quote of Psalm 22 that comes from the great agony and deep distress within his soul, which is meant to depict the darkest moment of all human history, when the incarnate Son expresses what it means to become the true sin offering for the world, and the emotional pain he feels when he experiences a real relational fracture with his Father, the one person in the world he loved the most. It is at this point in John 19:30 that Jesus utters his last dying words. "It is finished," or tetelestai, an accounting term that means paid in full, declaring that the debt owed to his Father for his people's sins were completely wiped away, and signifying how the work of redemption that the Father had given him was now accomplished. Then, with all the strength he had left, he cried aloud and let forth a piercing scream of anguish and gave up his spirit and physically died, bringing to an end the most tragic yet eternally significant death to ever take place.